very high needs.
Once COVID-19 relief money runs out, some districts facing financial strain might close schools, leaving families struggling to find conveniently located education for their children. In final news, fans who want to financially support college athletes through name, image, and likeness deals can now do so with just a few clicks online. Open Doors, a company that partners with dozens of schools to help initiate, track, and monitor so-called NIL deals, has launched a new online marketplace. Fans can go directly to athletes to purchase their autographs, personal appearances, and social media posts. School-specific pages will be available for universities that partner with the company. Through those pages, users can access athletes' profiles with rates for various services. For most athletes, those transactions are valued at well under $100, though some can range into the thousands. Find more news on afn.net. Be sure to subscribe to our free daily email news briefs. And thanks for listening.
When you hear this
is American Family News.
You know what follows is the truth. Your news from a Christian perspective.
Hundreds of teachers are going to have to walk into that school building, and they are forced to swallow political ideology that in many cases violates their very faith and conscience.
If you miss it at the top of the hour, American Family News podcasts are available at afn.net. And sign up for our daily news brief at afn.net.
You know, as Christians, we have to understand and be real with where we are.
That's what we have to see first, individually.
And where our mindset is and what we desire.
Airing the Addisons.
I think what God is really calling us back to, it's those individual personal revivals in our own lives where we're like, oh Lord, what have we done? We have minimized you.
Promoting truth, wisdom, and empowerment.
As the church, man, we should be on the forefront of making disciples, of indoctrination and godly things.
If we don't train our kids, they will not be able to stand.
Airing the Addisons.
On American Family Radio, thank you so much for listening. I'm Miki.
And I'm Will.
And J Mac and Victory are on tap to help us navigate the show today. Today, we want to turn our eyes toward Kansas. And I really want to just jump straight into the content because I think it's so important for us to pay attention to what's happening. And I am convicted myself that having heard this information a couple of weeks ago from my pastor, who brought it up in our congregation, I quickly, I don't know what happened, cycled through the information and thought, oh, wow, we should pay attention to that. Yeah. And then promptly didn't. And I mean, it's just, look, this is honest, right? And this is reality. And then in the course of conversation with another friend was reminded of this. And I thought, as I was listening and we were talking about it, I thought, wait a minute. I think I heard this before. Hold on a second. This is something that I'm aware of, but had forgotten. And I thought, wow, we've got to do a program on this. So joining us in the first segment to help us talk about this is one, my pastor who brought it up in church, who first got us turning our attention to Kansas and then talked about it on his program. I want to say for 2 shows, at least maybe a show and a half. I don't know. But I wanted him to address the Airing the Addisons audience so that we could be thinking about what's going on in Kansas and also discussing the spiritual implications. In the second segment, we're going to talk with a former Kansas lawmaker and look at what's happening on the ground there and the conversations that are being had among Christians. I think it's really interesting to observe what is happening. But first, let me make formal introductions. Abraham Hamilton III is the host of the Hamilton Corner, heard weeknights on American Family Radio at 5 Central. He also serves as legal counsel for AFA and public policy analyst. He is our friend and respected overseer of our fellowship who preaches messages that people promptly forget. That's actually not true. The messages are not forgotten, right? It's just some of the information because watch this. It's because it's so rich and so deep, Abe. That's what it is. It's just so much of it that the brain then has to decide what it's going to retain. Anyway, we're here to talk about this Kansas moment, and we have to talk about this Kansas moment. I went back and I listened to both of the programs that you did. Of course, excellent programs on this Kansas moment. I mean, and it's interesting that it's a Kansas moment, but it's kind of like a country moment. It's a moment that's happening in the United States of America, and it's a very telling moment. And so I wanted to kind of go back to some of the information that you've already unpacked, but I want you to unpack it for the Airing the Addisons listeners. From a national perspective, yes, Kansans are going to vote on a Value Them Both amendment tomorrow, but it also has national implications. Can you fill in some of the gaps? Tell our listeners why this amendment or why this vote tomorrow is important.
Yes, thank you so much for welcoming me to the show, Miki. And
no problem.
Will, and yeah, this is a vital moment for the state of Kansas, yes, but also for our nation, because Kansas is the first state in our nation that will have the opportunity for its electorate, meaning its citizens, to express their wills concerning the sanctity of human life, starting with the most vulnerable among us, the unborn child. Since Roe versus Wade has now been overturned, it's the first state that's going to get to do that. So really the eyes of the country will be on Kansas as a result of what happens with this vote. Now, for someone to think that this vote has been presented to Kansans solely because of Roe's overturning, they would be mistaken. So the way that we have landed where we are with Kansas getting to vote on this Value Them Both amendment, which is a proposition that will allow Kansans to amend their state constitution to do several things. First, to declare that there is no such thing as a right to murder unborn children in the state constitution in the state of Kansas. Second, it will expressly state that Kansas's state constitution does not require the government to fund in utero baby murder. Third, the amendment will allow Kansans to say that its state legislature and not its courts has the authority to govern the legalities concerning abortion, including but not limited to laws that account for circumstances of pregnancy resulting from rape or incest, or circumstances of necessity to save the life of the mother. That's a quote from the proposed amendment that will be added to Kansas's constitution if its voters basically ratify that.
Now, Abe, the thing, okay, so the last point there that was just made, and I want to go into, you having set that up, I want to go into the confusion that surrounds this amendment. But just hearing that last point that you just read there, it almost seems like Kansas is sort of like a replica of the country, so that if you don't have some, pulled out of the air constitutional right to abortion, and you say, no, you don't have a right to abortion, then it goes back to those who would make laws at the local level, which this is interesting because it's Kansas's constitution that has kind of pulled out of the air a right to virtually unlimited abortion. It's interesting, especially in a conservative state like Kansas. Yeah. But it seems to me that it would be easily understood for Kansans to be able to say, wait a minute, yeah, we want to have a say on this. Instead, that's not what we're seeing. There's an incredible amount of confusion surrounding this amendment. Why is that?
Yeah. The confusion surrounding the amendment largely, and I'll start with the confusion about the law, then additional parties meddling in the state of Kansas. The confusion is that you have many, as you mentioned, the state legislature in Kansas, by and large, is conservative, as that term is understood sociopolitically. Its citizenry is conservative sociopolitically, by and large. However, its court system is not at the Supreme Court level. And so you have those in Kansas who are saying, wait a minute, this amendment would not abolish abortion, eliminate abortion in total. It would simply give the legislature the authority to, quote unquote, regulate abortion. And that's not what we want to do. We don't want to regulate it. We want to get rid of it in total. And so you have some who are saying, yes, we want to get rid of it in total, but we recognize that this is a necessary step in order to allow us to do that. A lot of the confusion is coming in on several points. One, some people think that this is a response to Roe versus Wade being overturned. It's not. In order to understand the history of this amendment being presented to Kansas voters now, you have to understand back in 2015, the Kansas State Legislature passed a law that banned what's called dismemberment abortion. That was the law. The law banned dismemberment abortion. The technical term used to describe that is dilation and evacuation abortions. This is the almost exclusive mechanism used to kill second trimester babies, somewhere between 13 weeks and 24, 25 weeks. The abortionist, I don't want to even get too graphic, but it is graphic, literally severs the baby limb from limb inside the mother's womb and then pulls out each limb, ending with the brain. The abortionist knows the murder is successful if they see white matter leaking from inside the mother.
Oh, goodness. I probably should have given a disclaimer.
I'm sorry.
I think probably once we started talking about abortion, maybe parents took cover. I should have given a disclaimer. But I knew this, though, because I listened to both your programs where you issued a disclaimer and then went into. It's important for us. Let me say this, though. It's important for us to understand what we're talking about, because when we start to adopt cute little terms and phrases that sort of allow us to ignore what we're really discussing, I think we get into a lot of trouble. I say the same thing about the LGBTQ plus. Like, it kind of becomes just this little thing where we don't think about what we're actually saying. And so when we say D&E abortions, this is what we're talking about. And it is graphic, it is gruesome, but it is the reality of what we're talking about. So I'll just say disclaimer in place, and probably for the duration of the program, because that's the nature of what we're looking at when we have set our eyes on Kansas.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. I should have.
That's okay.
A little more careful, but that is the procedure. So then you had a pair of abortionists, a father and daughter team, unfortunately, that sued the Kansas State Legislature to invalidate that law, saying, "Wait a minute, if this law is allowed to pass, then that will be an impingement upon the right to abortion in the state." That case made its way, after the 2015 law was passed, made its way through the Kansas judiciary process until the Kansas State Supreme Court issued a ruling in 2019 saying that the state legislature in Kansas does not have the authority to ban dismemberment abortions because Kansas's constitution protects a right to abortion, and as a result, any law that would, as they described, impinge upon that is, as a result, unconstitutional. Now, let me just say categorically, that ain't in Kansas's constitution.
Yeah, I was gonna say it. So where does it come from? It's sort of like, even at the national level, it's like, where does it come from?
Very similar to the way Supreme Court Justice Thomas and Alito and those justices said there's no such thing as a right to an abortion in the federal constitution. Where does it come from? The way that things work in Kansas, unfortunately, is that there's a commission that exists that makes recommendations to Kansas's governor as to who they think should be on the state Supreme Court. The governor then has the authority to appoint directly to the Supreme Court who they want. And so based on Kansas's history of its past governors, 5 out of the 7 state Supreme Court judges are all appointed by Democrat governors who, guess what, believe in the right to kill children in the womb. So even if their state constitution doesn't say it, they basically made it up. Frankly, they made it up. So the state legislators in Kansas, recognizing that this was a complete, abuse of their state constitution, they said this is not going to stand. And so they started the process immediately after that ruling, back in 2019, to amend their state constitution. So the legislatures passed law following that ruling that they had to give a 2/3 majority in both houses of their state legislature to amend the Constitution to say, no, the state Constitution of Kansas does not create a right to kill children in the womb, nor does it require government funding for that barbaric practice. And the legislature has the authority to govern in this area. That is extremely significant because if Kansans do not amend their state constitutions to expressly rebuke its state Supreme Court and re-establish that authority in its legislature, abortion law in total in Kansas will be completely taken away from the prerogatives of its legislators, which is a direct way that its citizens express their will, and it will solely be in the province of 5 of 7 state judges who have already declared their affinity for killing children.
So Kansas would be like California or somewhere.
So you literally have the prospect that the state of Kansas, regardless of the the makeup of its constituency, that as it pertains to its abortion laws, it could very well be like California, namely because any regulations that they may have to limit, to eliminate, to abolish, to minimize abortion will have to go to this same rogue Supreme Court.
Wow.
So it is absolutely necessary. And I said it flat out on my program, were I in Kansas, I would emphatically vote yes for this amendment because the legislature must once again have this authority. Should this amendment pass, the state legislature could by simple majority abolish all abortions in short order.
I know we are headed to the break. Will the Great, do I have time for this clip too? I wanted to get Abe's take on this. It's just a few seconds. This is the type of political ad, or the propaganda, if you will, that's being circulated in Kansas. And I want to get your response to this. Is clip 2.
Abortion is highly regulated in Kansas, and abortion after viability is already banned. It's the law. But this amendment could let politicians ban any abortion with no exceptions for rape, incest, or a mother's life. It's extreme. Vote no.
All right. So why would this even sort of garner support among Christians and among conservatives in Kansas, being billed as something that is extreme? Now, I hear the music and I understand that there is no way that Abraham can respond in 30 seconds. It's just not done. The kind of thing is not done. So what we're going to do is we're going to just grab the break. We'll hold Abe over in the second segment, and we'll get our second segment guest on as well. And it'll just sort of be a meeting of the minds, if you will. We'll just talk this issue out, looking at what's happening in Kansas and why it is hugely important to this country, especially those who would stand up and defend life. I think if the outcome is not what one hopes, it might send a different signal. So we'll have to talk about that. Aaron the Addisons, American Family Radio. We'll grab the break and we'll be right back.
This is Bible League International. Thank God your pastor wasn't attacked on Sunday, but it happened to Pastor Nepo recently while preaching in Burundi, Africa. 20 radicals dragged him down the aisle to the front lawn where they beat him nearly to death because he's been faithfully sharing the gospel with Muslims, and nearly 200 have come to Christ in his village where Christians are attacked daily.
Anyone who comes to Jesus as their Lord and Savior are easily persecuted.
In coastal India, Jay Anth planted a church in a village with no Christians, and today more than half of that village follows Christ, but it did not come easy. His house was burned down twice, his wife was assaulted, and many in the church have been threatened with death, but they're not praying for an end to their suffering. They're praying for Bibles to endure and persevere. We're halfway to our goal to send God's Word to 16,000 Bible-less persecuted believers, and we need to wrap up in a week, so at $5 a Bible, $100 sends 20. Will you call 800-YES-WORD? 800-YES-WORD, or give at sendbiblesnow.org. Sendbiblesnow.org, and God bless you for caring.
AFA Foundation Director Riley Wildman.
A charitable gift annuity is perfect for AFA supporters with an eternal perspective like Lucy Overstreet.
Psalm 78 tells us that we are to tell our children and our grandchildren and the future generations after them what the Lord has done in our lives and what the Word of God says.
Lucy's charitable gift annuity will keep supporting this ministry for generations.
I wanted something that would have eternal value, and that's the way I think of the American Family Association investment.
Contact Riley Wildman and her staff at the AFA Foundation and find out if a charitable gift annuity is right for you. 800-326-4543, extension 345. Or visit our website, afafoundation.net.
My life is not about me, it's about Him.
You know, it's true. Difficult times have a way of focusing us. We have to think about what matters most when it comes to our spending, our health care. No doubt. This is why so many people are joining Medishare right now. Medishare is a trusted way to save up to 50% on your monthly health care costs. More than 400,000 people have already made the switch. It's pretty obvious why, too, especially now during this challenging season with healthcare costs and out-of-pocket expenses going up. Medishare can save you a lot of money. The typical family saves $500 a month. And Medishare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry that's worked beautifully for 27 years. There are different options to choose from to fit your budget. I'll give you the number here in a second. And if you call, you can get a price within 2 minutes. Maybe now is the perfect time to make the switch and start saving. Here you go. Call 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE. 833-44-BIBLE.
Give them life.
As a pastor for over 50 years, I counsel and pray with individuals facing difficult personal decisions. Sometimes those conversations are about abortion. As Christians, we are instructed to love one another. We do so when we respect and trust women as God does. I'm voting no on the proposed amendment because it replaces religious freedom with government control. It restricts women's rights and it puts their very lives at risk. Join me and thousands of Christians in voting no.
Man. Okay, welcome back to Aaron the Addisons on American Family Radio. If you live in Kansas, you may have been the victim of that ad. Hopefully not the victim, maybe the person who was outraged to watch it. But tomorrow, Kansans have the opportunity to return the voice of the people, or to return the people's voice back to them, away from the Supreme Court, the Kansas Supreme Court. Am I wording that in a way that is articulate, Abe? What's the best way to say that? How do you accurately describe what's going to happen tomorrow?
Yeah, I would say that tomorrow Kansans have the opportunity to restore the proper separation of power that allows the citizens, as their will is expressed through their elected representatives, to govern matters concerning life, including those most vulnerable among them.
So there is often misinformation and just outright disinformation that I would say that Christians are often on the receiving end of, and sometimes just outright targeted by that type of disinformation, like what we just heard in this clip. How would you respond to that? If a Christian saw that ad, or if a Christian received that kind of information and for some unknown reason believed that they should stay out of this, that they should not vote tomorrow in favor of the Value Them Both amendment, how would you respond to that, Abe?
I would say very simply, the Lord expects of us, just as he expected of our ancestors in the faith, like the Apostle Paul, who took full advantage of his Roman citizenship in order to advance God's kingdom agenda and to proclaim the gospel even unto the halls of the Roman Caesar. We have the opportunity, because God in his divine providence saw fit to allow us to live in a nation that is a constitutional republic with democratic features, where we are self-governing. We get to express our desire in these areas. I literally have in my hand a copy of a mailer. I'm showing it to Will if anybody is watching, that was sent to Kansans that says, on August 2nd, send the government a message, say no to another government mandate. That's wow. That's just straight up deception.
Wow.
That's just straight up deception. Nothing in the constitutional amendment requires government to do anything. There is no mandate. Nothing in the proposed constitutional amendment mandates anything from the government.
So people may have the COVID vaccine, on their minds when they see that.
Exactly.
Oh,
it's interesting that they know the kind of wording, though, that would stir some people.
Yes.
And yet use that wording in like a manipulative fashion, like just kind of hoping that there will be these buzzwords that people will see and they'll say no to that. But it's deception.
Yeah, it's absolute deception. As I explained earlier, if you read the amendment, I would encourage every person, especially if you're in Kansas, first of all, read the proposed amendment. Read it for yourself. Don't limit your analysis to what you've heard from other people. Read it for yourselves. I said on my program, simply put, if I were writing this amendment, I would have stopped a sentence short of what's in the amendment. I would have simply said, because Kansans value both women and children, the Constitution of the state of Kansas does not require government funding of abortion and does not create a secure right to abortion. To the extent permitted by the Constitution of the United States, the people, through their elected state representatives and state senators, may pass laws regarding abortion, period. That's the end of the amendment, if I were drafting it. Now, there's additional language that refers to rape and incest, but if you understand the reality of what's being proposed, it's simply saying that the legislature has the authority on this. The objective of this is to take back its power from the courts. The villain, if you will, if you need a villain, is the Supreme Court that manufactured a right to abortion out of whole cloth. It does not exist in Kansas' state constitution. And what people in the state of Kansas need to understand, especially those who are Christians, who have convictions about life, you need to understand that if this amendment does not pass, all matters concerning vulnerable unborn children will be lorded over by the courts, not the legislature.
Yeah.
That's what Kansans need to understand.
And let me say this, you can go and read the amendment as I did at valuethemboth.com. There's an amendment tab. You can click on that and you can read it in its entirety for yourself. So that you can be well versed in what's going on. I want to bring on our next guest here. Kasha Kelly actually served as an elected representative to the Kansas legislature beginning in 2005. She served for 12 years. For the majority of that time, she served on appropriations, vice chairing even at one point, also sat on the General Government Budget Subcommittee, looking at taxation, as well as serving on and chairing education at one point, also commerce, energy, and health and human services throughout her time. She is joining us today because it was a conversation with her that actually reminded me of what our pastor had shared. And I thought, wait a minute, I think someone talked about Kansas. But she was talking about what she is observing in Kansas, even among Christians, and that there's an incredible amount of money that's being pumped into Kansas. And I think the question, I want her to ask this question publicly, but when you start looking at who's on what side, sometimes that can kind of be an indication of where we ought not to be. And so I wanted to talk about that. Kasha, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Mickey, a blessing, a privilege, sharing airtime with you three, blessing and privilege. Those words come to mind.
Well,
Thank
listen.
you.
My friend, let me just tell you, I was so stirred in talking with you and hearing from you what's happening right there on the ground. Before we get into what is happening today, I kind of want to go back to your service. I want to go back to your serving Kansans for 12 years, because you also said something to me that I thought was profound. You talked about being accountable to God for how you voted, not only just as a representative and being accountable to the people who elected you, who hired you basically, but you talked about being accountable to God. Why is that so important?
Absolutely. I really, really believe, and I expressed this to you, but I believe this with all my heart. When you are in a position of power, particularly when you're a lawmaker and you are making rules for millions, in our case, 2.5 to 3 million people in the state of Kansas to live by, you have a duty to do what is moral and upstanding and correct. You have a duty to not hinder someone's life, but to help their life. I believe this. And at the end of the day, I believe that I'm accountable to the Lord for every vote that I make. And I mean every vote that I make, I'm accountable to Him. And, a lot of times in the legislature with some of the votes that we would make, they were not easy votes.
Mm-hmm.
I always slept well. I always slept well. I never had a time where even when I had other legislators saying, change your vote, you're not going to get elected again, change your vote, you're not going to get contributions. Nope, that's not the right way to vote. This is the right way to vote. Because someday I will have to give an account for those things, and I believe that we all will.
Well, take us inside the borders of Kansas right now. And I mean, I guess we could go back to 2019 when the Kansas Supreme Court ruled that the Kansas Constitution contained a nearly unlimited right to abortion. How did that affect your state?
Well, let me step back just a slight second on that, Mickey, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
A little bit of a finer point on what Abe was saying. Because I want listeners to really understand this. Article 1, Section 1 of the Kansas Bill of Rights is where the Kansas Supreme Court said that abortion right comes in. They decided that liberty included a natural right to bodily autonomy, which then included the right to abortion. So you can see how much they stretched that.
Yes.
But that's where that comes from. That's where they say that right to abortion came in. And obviously, I mean, I couldn't say it any better than Abe said in the first part of the program. I mean, you absolutely when you have, this is why it is so important who you vote for. You know, a lot of folks out there, unfortunately, don't do their research on people. They'll look at the postcards that come in, or they'll get an emotional response to an advertisement that they see on TV. They don't really bother to drill down and find out who the candidate is. And it's super important that you know who your candidates are, because they are supposed to be voting the will of the people. And when the Supreme Court came in and just unilaterally worked or took out all of the work that in my 12 years, I served with a wonderful, just golly, he's going to have a lot of jewels in his crowns, representative by the name of Lance Kinzer, who carried most of our pro-life law in the state of Kansas, and bless his heart, he is absolutely so true to the message. We passed so many things in 12 years. I don't know if you remember the Tiller days in Kansas, but Kansas truly was an abortion destination, and that has some eternal consequences that I think we will get into here a little bit later as well.
Yes, we will.
But we worked and worked and worked through a series of measures that had to do with regulating our Board of Healing Arts, that had to do with just giving women who stepped inside an abortion facility information on what they were doing, because they weren't even receiving that. They weren't even receiving that. I mean, from the smallest things on up to the biggest things, to try to eradicate abortion in Kansas. And in one fell swoop, with the Hodes case, which is the case that Abe mentioned, that was gone. Everything that the people voted through their representatives to be put into law was gone. And so all of a sudden, and I want to talk about the abolitionist point of view, and I think you're very much going to get into that, especially with some of the things. Yeah, I mean, you take that point of view, whatever part of the spectrum that you are on abortion, and I hope that everybody's on fully eradicated. We can't do anything in Kansas without passing Value Them Both tomorrow.
That's so important.
Yeah.
I think that's so
important to know.
Yeah.
That's important to know.
Yeah.
Because if the view is, because I shared this with you, Miki. I had a gentleman that called my show who was saying that he opposed it because he was an abolitionist, and he felt like, well, it doesn't abolish abortion immediately, instantly, right at this moment, so we shouldn't vote for it. And I say, well, what do you think needs to happen? He said, well, we need to start over and have the legislature later abolish abortion in total. And so I just and so I just said, well, if you're confident that you can do that later, how would this stop you from doing that? How would doing this stop you from doing that later? And I made the point that you pointed out so perfectly, that unless the courts are rebuked by the Kansas voters in saying that you do not have the authority to govern this issue, the state legislature cannot do anything without the Supreme Court being rebuked from the 2019 Roe decision.
Yeah, I'm thinking that. Go ahead, Kasia. Go ahead, respond to that.
Yeah. Well, and I was just going to say, I mean, if you just stop and think about this. I want my voice heard. You do? You're going to vote tomorrow to suppress your voice for who knows how much longer. And I have heard people say, well, we just need new justices. Well, as was pointed out earlier, we have a real situation with our Supreme Court here in Kansas, and it's not only affected this, it's affected education funding and some other areas where the constitutional powers that were given to the legislature were abdicated, given away, ripped away, however you want to look at it, usually largely never to be returned. That's how government works. That's why you don't want to cede ground. It's very hard to get it back. But, the whole idea behind this is if you want to have a voice, this must pass tomorrow. And the abolitionist point of view is that if we can't have it all, we're not going to vote for it. But the whole idea behind a legislative body is that, and here's the thing, if you want to have it all, that is great. Every abolitionist, once we pass this, needs to be in the state capitol when that legislature starts
August
up again.
3rd.
Yes. Well, and we go back in January. Needs to be there with some pre-filed bills, having talked to committee chairs, having shown their interest in this, and make their voice heard.
Right.
Because I heard a pastor literally say, if you get Value Them Both passed in Kansas, God will be very displeased with you. It is an iniquitous decree. And that is a quote.
Oh.
Wow.
Let's pause for a second here, because I really think that we have to consider and weigh the implications of a statement like that and the effect that it has on potential voters and the direction that they might vote in. The problem that I have, and I think that all of us here, all of us discussing this today, we are in full agreement with God on how he has defined life and the value of it. Amen. And there is absolutely no question in our minds that we want the abolition of abortion in this country. We want life to be defended and protected. We want it seen the way God sees it. The problem that I have with some of the commentary that's coming from some people who I think are well-meaning. It's the illustration, Kasha, that you and I were discussing. It's like saying, if I can't save everyone in the burning building, then I will not run in and save anyone. And I think when we start talking about the opportunities that people have in their states, right? And I almost hesitate to use the word incremental changes, because I understand that that's sort of like that's one of those fiery words where people think if you're saying that, then you devalue life at 15 weeks or that you devalue life at 10 weeks. That's not at all what I'm saying. Right. But what I'm saying is that sometimes those incremental changes have the big, huge effect that maybe, I don't know, the case gets argued before the Supreme Court. And I don't know, maybe Roe is overturned as a result of that case being heard. But we've got to start somewhere. The point that you guys are making today is that if you don't vote yes, if this amendment, value them both, is not passed in Kansas, you don't have a starting point. You don't have a voice. You don't have an opportunity to do anything down the line. So I want to come back and I want to pick up here talking about the spiritual implications of what might happen in Kansas tomorrow. This is Aaron the Addisons, American Family Radio. We'll be right back with Abraham Hamilton III and Kasha Kelly. Stay close.
AFA Action. Repairing the foundation. American Family Radio.
Announcing AFA.net/connect.
One News Now.
It's the one click that will link you to so many AFA platforms.
Repairing the foundation.
Pick and choose which updates you want to receive. Easily subscribe or unsubscribe.
American Family Studio.
And to quote our privacy policy, American Family Association will not sell, rent, or lease your personal information to outside organizations.
AFA Journal.
Make a better connection with AFA at AFA.net/connect. AFR programming is now available on Alexa.
You're joking, right?
Nope, not joking.
Seriously?
Yep, this is not a drill.
Wait a minute. No way.
There's a way, the Alexa way. So if you just happen to miss your favorite shows, no worries. You can now listen to each podcast with Alexa. It's simple and it's free. Just visit afr.net/apps and click Alexa. We're not joking.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. One of the first stops we make when we get to Jerusalem to begin our Holy Land trip, we go to the Mount of Olives, which overlooks the old city of Jerusalem. You've read about the Mount of Olives in the Bible. You've read about the city of Jerusalem in the Bible. Those are real places that we're going to visit in March of 2023. We've already registered about 50 people. We hope to take about 100 people on this very special trip to Israel. For all the information, go to twholyland.com. The dates are there, the costs are there, the itinerary is there, everything you need to know. twholyland.com, twholyland.com. No COVID shots required, no COVID testing required. It's all back to normal. A passport and a suitcase, and you can join us. Go to twholyland.com for all the information.
Hello?
Hey, stranger.
Oh, hi. Thank goodness it's you. I was afraid to answer the phone.
Why? What's up?
The credit card companies are after me. They want me to make payments, and the calls never stop.
Ouch. Been there before, but I got help from Trinity Debt Management.
Trinity?
Yeah, I called, and right away, Trinity contacted my creditors and got my interest rates cut in half. They ended all the late fees and over-limit charges, and they stopped those annoying phone calls.
Bet that was a relief.
Yep. Then they put me on a plan that consolidated my bills into one easy easy monthly payment. That way, I paid off my debt fast while saving thousands.
Nice.
Trinity even showed me how to plan and meet a monthly budget. So now I'm debt-free for keeps.
Wow. Do you still have their number?
Sure. Here, write this down and call 1-800-788-1813.
Can you repeat that?
1-800-788-1813. That's 1-800-788-1813.
I see that tiny smile. She makes it all worthwhile. Look at that precious face. This fight is not a waste. There is still work to be done. There is still work to be done.
This is not a partisan issue. This is a human rights issue. This is a sanctity of life issue at its very core.
If you don't speak up for the unborn, who is going to? Who's going to do it?
In 2019, the Kansas Supreme Court issued a ruling that forced the state of Kansas to recognize an unlimited and unrestricted right to abortion.
I think it's just common sense that, that we would not allow for, as the people in the state of Kansas, to have an unregulated abortion industry. That's just a horrible idea.
So, thoughtful people, people of faith, people of goodwill, people who believe in human rights need to take this very seriously.
The Value Them Both Amendment is a pro-life constitutional amendment that restores the right of the people of Kansas through their elected officials to regulate the abortion industry and to protect both mothers and their babies.
Both need to be valued. That child, unborn child, and that mom need to be cared for.
When we value both, we are caring for future mothers as much as we're caring for future children.
This Value Them Both Amendment, if we do not pass this, I believe that Kansas becomes a safe haven for abortion in our nation. That there will be people that come from all over the United States to come to Kansas to have an abortion.
I would hate for Kansas to become the destination for other states.
Let's rise up as one people on the basis of God's clearly defined word, on the basis of life, and let's speak with one voice, and let's vote to pass this amendment, and let's protect the life of the unborn here in this state.
Oh man, welcome back. Welcome back to Aaron the Addisons on American Family Radio. We have brought in the big guns. The heavy hitters are here with us today. Abraham Hamilton III yes. and Kasha Kelly, who served as an elected representative to the Kansas legislature for 12 years. But she's also a mama. She's also a follower of the Lord Jesus Christ, and she is watching what is happening in her state and having some real conversations where I just thought, man, we need to have this conversation publicly. We talk about the spiritual implications of the blood of innocent people made in the image of God, crying out from the earth there in Kansas, and the very real possibility that Kansas could become almost a haven of sorts for those who would come into the state to have their babies murdered there because they can do that without restriction. I mean, it's just unthinkable, but let's think about that and let's talk about that. Kasha, I wanted to get your take on the clip that we just played, because I think one of the pastors that we hear in this clip kind of summarizes your concerns almost perfectly. When I found that clip, I thought this is exactly what we were talking about over the weekend, the spiritual implications of Kansas being sort of like the hub for abortion.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of what he mentions is already in play because of the trigger laws that have happened in the states around us. We already are seeing some folks, or ladies, women, come in to have their abortions of convenience. I had read a Time article, and I'm no fan of Time magazine, but I'd read a Time article recently And they have some statements from some women in there. One of them saying, Kansas, we can't see this go away in Kansas. They're our hope. Oddly enough, they're our hope, where we can go and have an abortion. And this particular woman that was speaking was coming for an abortion of convenience. It wasn't convenient for her right now, so she's coming to Kansas. And one abortion is too many. I mean, we all agree one abortion is too many. But the projections of what will happen in the state of Kansas if this does not pass tomorrow, I just want to be so clear to everybody who's listening. This is not just about Kansas, because Kansas will be the bellwether for the rest of the nation. You have to understand, if this goes down in Kansas, it looks like we are saying that it is okay, not only for the people to not have a voice, but for a right, which does not exist, to be enshrined in the Constitution. And I can promise you that other states, other Planned Parenthood and all of those who are pouring money into Kansas right now to defeat this, pouring money in, will use that in other states to say, look what conservative Kansas did, and this is what should be done here. And I want this to not just go over to win by a little bit. I want it to win by a lot. We need to give a clear message to say that we as Christians believe in the value of life. We understand that God ordained family. He ordained church. He ordained the government. And in government, we are supposed to work as His believers. We're supposed to be in there with our voices, making known what it is that we want to happen. And I think citizens don't understand how powerful their voices and their presence are. They need to make their presence known so that we can do this. But this is hugely important. If this doesn't pass in Kansas, if we become a destination for abortion, it frankly scares me to think what the spiritual implication will be for this particular state. We know that God does not bless those who run against His will. He takes His hand away. And, I think of all the good people that live here, and it concerns me greatly.
Abe, I was thinking about our own city. I was thinking about New Orleans and so much of the debauchery that takes place in our city, and that before Katrina took place on a regular basis, it was sort of like, oh, they won't let you do that anywhere. You can come and do it here, or we will host it. We will handle this. And you think about the spiritual implications of that, and then the murder that takes place in our city, the blood of innocent people crying out from the ground. I think sometimes people ignore this because it's uncomfortable to talk about. Like, we don't like to talk about spiritual things sometimes, but let's talk about what the Bible reveals to us as far as the spiritual implications of the blood of innocent people crying out from the ground. This is not something that we're making up. This is, in fact, biblical.
No, you're not making it up. It's defilement. It's a beckoning of defilement. If, as is recorded for our benefit in the book of Genesis, when Cain slew Abel, and it says that Abel's blood cried out to Yahweh from the ground, how much more does the blood of 60 plus million innocent babies? And then in a situation, and you have to understand what's being presented to Kansas within the context of what the Lord is doing in our entire country. And the very moment where on the national stage, many people never could have dreamed of seeing Roe versus Wade overturned. In a moment where God is extending His grace to our nation in this fashion, where people did not have the opportunity to weigh in with a vote or to weigh in any particular fashion, but the Lord sovereignly steps in and says, enough, and Roe is overturned. Now to have a state to come and say, know what, we don't want that extension of grace. We're willing to either sit on what you've given us in order to assert our volition in concert with your will, or even worse, to yield to propagandist material which reveals, and I don't want to be insulting to anybody, but when we as Christ followers are ensnared by propagandist material, it reveals a lack of discernment. And to have such a blunted capacity for discernment, where we're willing to, in our local sphere, where we have more opportunity to exercise our investment in the place where we live, to use that and to say no. I share my sister's concern. In my city, and I'll tell you, I'm not talking about anybody. This is my city where I was born and raised and growing up. By God's grace, after Hurricane Katrina, I moved to Houston, Texas, because I was forced there. I met my wife there, but I traveled back and forth to do premarital counseling. I would be asleep in the plane, and I would know when I was over New Orleans. Every single time I would know it. I would be awakened. I could physically, I know it spooks people out, but I could physically feel it. This is a city that people converge on at certain points in the year because of the spiritual wickedness in our city. This is a city to where other people in other places, they can't do this. They can't walk down the street with alcoholic beverages. They can't see, scantily clad women, all this kind of stuff. And they are
Just out
astounded, just out in the open, at what they do there. There is a defilement of the land when you have people using the authority that God has given them to use that volition to say, no, you know what? Instead of militating toward the grace of God and his will and his purposes, we're going to go in the opposite direction. It never ends well. It never ends well. Wow. And it puts the locale in a position to beckon additional, as my sister articulated, the releasing of the hand of God in terms of, this is what you want. This is what you want. I shudder to think that you could actually end up having what you've expressed that you want.
Man, it's just amazing that we are more comfortable ignoring clear biblical fact because, we can't put our hands on that per se. So we just ignore it. We just kind of say, well, it doesn't really exist if I can't put my hands on that. Yeah. But the Bible is very clear about the value of human life. The Bible is very clear about life beginning at conception. The Bible is very clear about God's judgment. I mean, you read that the Lord was expressed to the children of Israel, if you will, to the people of Israel that, look, if you do the things that the nations before you did, the land is going to spit you out. Like, you will be driven from this land just as they were driven from this land for the things that you do, that they did, that I judged. And for some reason, we think we Christians in America, we sort of don't have to worry about offending God. We almost kind of operate as if we're beyond the possibility or, the potential to offend a holy and righteous God. There's something else, Cash, I want to go back to you on this because there's something that you said as we were talking about this and us really needing to survey, whose side we're on. Like, there are certain people that when they show up, and you tend to agree with them. Now, look, from time to time, you have to say, okay, well, you know what, they're right. But usually you would say, well, they're on my side because I'm on the side of righteousness and truth. But there are other times where you're like, wait a minute, if we are arguing the same point and it's wrong and we're on the side with those who are wrong and loudly wrong, then we have to be concerned. I go back to, the witches who were casting the spells. And I'm like, it's troubling if you ever find yourself on the side of the witches. But here's another incident or another instance where you have to really watch what side you're on. Students for Life Action had an 18-year-old volunteer just yesterday who was out in, Overland Park in Kansas, and they were knocking on doors. And this 18-year-old girl by the name of Grace Hartsock was knocking on a door. A woman comes to the door and says, no, I'm sorry, I don't think you want to talk to us, because she starts talking about the Value Them Both Amendment. Voters are going to have an opportunity to vote on this on Tuesday. This woman says, no, you don't want to talk to us. Well, she turns to leave, thanks the woman for her time, turns to leave, and the woman's daughter starts screaming and just cussing at her and eventually runs outside of the house and begins attacking this 18-year-old student. This is a press release today. This just happened yesterday. And this 18-year-old student is trying to protect her head. She's punching her with closed fists, chasing after her, yelling at her, saying, I hope you get raped. I hope you get hit by a car. And one just has to think, if that's the person who is opposing the amendment, I mean, Kasha, do we as Christians want to find ourselves on that side?
Absolutely not. I hate to use the word bedfellows, but you hear a lot in politics, and that is definitely the wrong bedfellow. I mean, if you look at the groups that are pouring money into Kansas, and if somebody is pouring money in to defeat something, don't you have to ask the question why? And don't you have to look at where the money's coming from? Planned Parenthood has poured a lot of money and a lot of abortion providers have. I have heard, I cannot confirm, but I have heard that money has come from Soros to be poured in. On those two alone, you talk about the article that you just mentioned. Nikki, when I hear that, I think demons, because I really do. I mean, that irrational reaction to somebody who has simply said, okay, thank you for your time and this turning around.
Right.
That irrational reaction, just makes you wonder what is going on there. And violence always begets violence. It just begets violence. If you're going to do it in the womb, then why not do it?
Come on.
To somebody standing there, and what makes murder wrong or anything like that? I mean, we're just going down a trail that it never will work. It will never work. So you have to see, what side am I on? You have to ask the questions. You must.
Let me say this to all of our listeners who are in Kansas. You can go to valuethemboth.com. Prayerfully consider how you're going to cast your vote tomorrow if you haven't already done that. I know that there's been some early voting, but I'm with Kasha on this, that it shouldn't even be close. It shouldn't even be close. There needs to be a resounding message that is communicated nationally, and indeed all eyes are on Kansas, as right they should be. Kansas, y'all got to show up. Yeah. Show up. All right, Aaron the Addisons, American Family Radio. We're out of time. Until tomorrow, Lord willing.
God bless.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio. Faith, family,